Today's Olympic interview is with Jamie Redman, and she's coming to us from Spokane, Washington, where she's been nice enough to agree to carve out some time and talk about her Olympic experience. And I want to give a little bit of background for Jamie, like I do in these interviews with every athlete. But Jamie was born in 1986 in Spokane, born and raised there, and ultimately played other sports. And she can talk about that, really what led up to trying rowing kind of in high school. Jamie matriculated from Lewis and Clark High School in 2004 to Yale University and really took up rowing seriously. She had some exposure to it in Spokane, but was in the big leagues at Yale. For those that don't know, Yale is the first rowing institution, first university to have a rowing club in America in 1843. The first rowing race between two universities was Harvard and Yale in 1852. Fortunately, they decided to let women in the club in 1972 when Yale began their women's crew team, and the rest is history. Yale's always been a very good rowing club, and while Jamie was there, they were the best. For 2 of her 4 years, they won an NC2A championship, and
Yep.
she can talk a little bit about that and that experience. And then that in turn led her to ultimately become a candidate, along with the U.S. boat, to be selected for the Olympics in 2012. Not everybody gets to go to the Olympics in a lot of sports. You have to be selected as a country, your team, and the U.S. was one of the boats to be selected for the London Games. And I'm not going to spoil any of the details in terms of what happened after that in terms of your journey, Jamie. But thank you for being with us so much. And I'm looking forward to hearing about your story in your own words. So let's talk a little bit about growing up in Spokane first and what other sports you played and, kind of how you were wired. You're 6 feet tall, right?
I'm six
So
feet tall. Yep.
you were tall. You were always tall as a child for your age growing up?
Yeah, so I was pretty much my height as a freshman in high school. So you can imagine, as a 6 foot tall 14-year-old, I towered over my classmates, both girls and boys. I didn't grow up rowing. My experience with paddle sports was actually just as a whitewater canoeer and kayaker along the rivers of the Pacific Northwest. So really, growing up, my sports were mainly distance running, so cross country and track, and Nordic skiing. I loved it. I loved being part of a team. I was pretty strong. I was pretty fast, more or less. But like I said, I towered over my competitors. So in many cases, I might have been, I don't know, about a foot taller, 80 pounds heavier than some of the girls I was racing against. So when I first heard of this sport called crew, all they told me is they like tall athletes and they like strong athletes, and you don't have to have a lot of experience. And that got me to thinking, maybe I can still be a student athlete in college, just in a different sport. So I still remember to this day my first college visit where I went to go visit a boathouse. And I walked down onto the dock and I met 30 young women who I could look directly in the eye because they were all my height. And that's when I first realized, this rowing business, this could be the perfect fit for me. And that's when that just got the wheels rolling to think that maybe this could be a sport that I could pursue. Um, I I was lucky enough in Spokane. This was the first year that Gonzaga University is our local university, and they have a very accomplished rowing program. They started a community learn to row program my senior year. So I did a little learn to row where I learned how to, get in a boat and put oars in the riggers and how to feather and very, very basic, learn to row sort of techniques. But it was fun, it was exciting, and it was really aspirational for me to be in a sport where my height was something that was an advantage instead of a setback.
Hmm.
Um, so that was kind of my first exposure to the idea of rowing. Um, I do remember my path to Yale, my path to Ivy League was also somewhat non-traditional. I grew up in Washington State, and so I'm all about going to University of Washington. Go Huskies. This is a team that we had heard of. It's a highly respected university in our state. But one of our family friends, I think this was my old babysitter, had gone to UW, and her roommate had been a UW rower. Now, this roommate had had an incredibly successful career as a rower. She had rowed for the Olympics, and she had just been hired as the new freshman coach at Gale. And she just so happened to be in Spokane visiting some friends and some roommates and some family who were in town. And so this family friend recommended that, maybe I should just reach out, give her a call. And lo and behold, my first visit with a college coach was just happened to be with the coach I ended up rowing for 4 years. So it was just the weirdest convergence of a small world syndrome where I didn't, like I said, I didn't know anything about various rowing programs or what teams were the best or who I should be recruited by. I didn't know any of that. All I knew is I had met this young woman. She was charismatic, she was tall like me, and she told me that if I worked hard, I could be a rower too. So one thing led to the other. I got my Yale acceptance letter and I started identifying myself as a rower. Granted, I didn't know how to train, I didn't know how to race, I barely knew how to pick the boat out of the water, but I just knew this is a sport that I was excited about and I was going to try really, really hard to learn fast, to learn quickly. So
So yeah, that's cute. You saw those women, and those you realize that's my tribe. Those are my
that's
people. They
these
look
are
like
my
me.
people. Exactly. And especially coming from a cross country team, this is a group of women I can borrow homecoming dresses from. I
That's
could share
funny.
shoes with. I didn't have to squat down in a group photo. It sounds so silly, but it is a really powerful experience when you're a young woman. And so that for me, I think that rowing, as I kind of went through college, it was not only the physical perfect fit for me, is also from the emotional social side the perfect fit. The idea of working together with a bunch of women, striving towards the same goal, the shared suffering, the shared triumph. That's something that really resonated with me. From the emotional level. And so it was just, again, the perfect kind of convergence of all these different factors where I showed up at college as a complete rookie and, but learning how to row at one of the best boathouses in the country with some of the best coaches in the country. And I'm sitting in between some of the best junior recruits in the country. And so it was the perfect situation for me to develop and learn and kind of grow into my athletic potential. So yeah, showed up as a complete rookie and within several months I was racing in a varsity boat. I was in the second varsity boat as a freshman. You know, a and a year later, I'm in the varsity boat. And 2 years later, we won our first national championship at NCAA's. And then 3 years later, I made my first world's team and won a world championship. So it's amazing how that development and talent just snowballs when you have that tribe around you that's just encouraging that good development.
Yeah, it's such a great story, and it is a little bit of being in the right place at the right time, but then
Absolutely.
making the most of it. So it's a little bit of luck combined with hard work, where you just happen to land in a program with a mentor, a coach, and a
Mhm.
bunch of other really capable people around you, and the good equipment, the resources of the boat club and all that. And you managed to get into Yale. We kind of jumped over you getting your acceptance letter, but talk a little bit about that, because the Ivy Leagues, there are no athletic scholarships. Athletes don't get a break like they do
No.
necessarily at other places, and it's not a foregone conclusion just because you want to go there. And even if you have good grades, many people don't get in.
Yeah.
So was that tricky at all, looking back?
Well, I think at the time I approached it was just with the blissful ignorance of a 17-year-old who has all the opportunities. But no, I was a valedictorian. I did have good grades. I was National Honor Society president. I on paper I was capable. However, you're right. It is incredibly challenging and competitive anywhere in the Ivy League. I found out later the athletic department doesn't have a lot of pull, but they do have a little bit. They
That's
can
right.
give a little bit of a boost to um, uh, incoming freshmen who could be a good fit. And so we sometimes they call them like preferred walk-ons or whatnot. And so I do credit the athletic department for giving me just that little benefit of the doubt when that admissions committee was looking at my application. And I found out later this is not entirely uncommon, especially as women's rowing has grown up in NCAA's. There's a lot of collegiate programs where they will intentionally set aside one or two recruited spots for an athlete that doesn't have a lot of experience, rowing experience, but does show a lot of athletic potential. And so my college coach did do that. There's always a recruit, a freshman who came in who used to be a high school swimmer or a high school volleyball player, or someone who had just done a learn to row, or and that's something that I believe is still pretty common, where sometimes it's finding that diamond in the rough, that 6'2" freshman that used to be a, I don't know, a distance swimmer or something. So
Yeah.
I'm very grateful for that opportunity. I'm glad they took a chance on me. I like to think they made good on their investment, but it
I
is, yeah, this is something
I
I
would
tell,
agree. I
yeah.
mean, and there you were with all the other high school valedictorians all around you. That's what you find out, right? It seems like
Hmm.
shouldn't you be a shoe-in? But it's not quite like that. And the most they can ever tell you from everything I've learned is you're preferred. You're
Hmm.
likely. You're likely.
You're
That's
likely.
the closest thing to a lock. And so, I just give yourself credit. You did earn your way in there, I think, and then you made the most of it when you got in. So, talking about the rowing itself and your learning curve that you went through, and we've talked about a little bit how difficult the training is. It's a lot of guts, kind of a sport. It's an
Yep.
endurance. It's mental toughness. Talk a little bit about, as you elevated and you made it into the varsity boat and your boat got faster and faster. Obviously, you're finding that chemistry of 8 people rowing together and perfect synchronization. But the dark side of that is trying to do that for 2,000 meters, a mile and a quarter is the equivalent of your race, right? And we
Yeah.
talked about it's really hardly holding back. You're not rowing at 50% of power. You're kind of right out of the box at the
Hmm.
start. You're redlining up there and just hanging
Yeah.
on for 6 minutes.
Exactly. They put rowing up there with some of the most physically challenging, or from the endurance perspective, some of the most challenging sports out there, up there with cross country skiing and rowing, and that it uses, or and swimming, excuse me, and that rowing uses every muscle in your body. It is a full, like you are tapping the limits of your endurance and your aerobic potential and your VO2 max and your sprint, like your anaerobic threshold. Every system is working so hard. Um, we call it a strength endurance sport. So, endurance, just like swimming, running, cycling, requires a huge amount of work. We want to build a huge aerobic engine, but also there's a strength component. Unlike swimming or running, where you have one limb that is working hard and the other one is recovering in this sort of reciprocal movement, rowing's not like that. All muscles are working together and then they're all recovering at the same time. So there's a huge amount of power and strength that needs to be
Yeah.
developed. So that takes a whole different type of training. Plus, you kind of hit the nail on the head, is there's that technical element. It takes time to learn how to row with your crew. It takes time to figure out the impulse and the timing and the power application to make that boat flow. And that itself takes a huge amount of time and repetition and tedium and cognitive attention. So while the racing is incredibly challenging, races are anywhere between, I don't know, 6 or 7 minutes. And so that from the aerobic side is that's all out. That's like mile run. That's like running a stadium. That's incredibly aerobically intensive, but also just the cognitive attention it takes to make those tiny little adjustments to take your rhythm and conform it to the rest of the boat to really optimize your efficiency. um, this would be a normal day in the life of for our training. So this was on the national team. It's a little different when you're a student athlete where you have restrictions on how many hours you can work out. But a normal day for us is we would arrive at the boathouse and we do a warm-up workout just to get our body ready. That would be a 2-mile run plus a whole body weight work kind of strength set, including, squats and lunges and push-ups and core. Then we'd get our boats and we'd go out and we would row for anywhere between 2 or 3 hours. Sometimes it was hard, intense work. Sometimes it was longer, more endurance, technical work, but it's still time in the boat, taking thousands of strokes. Then we'd come back in, we'd have, half an hour off, and then we'd go for a little endurance workout. So usually we would go for a run around the lake. Now, this lake was 8 miles around, but that would be our second workout of the day. We would come back in, we would get lunch or take a nap. Those of us who had jobs would work those jobs, then come back to the boathouse and we do a strength workout, like in the weight room. After that weight workout, we would go back out for another easy row just to work on technique or skill set. And so when all is said and done, that's almost, when you count all the time for training and recovering and showering and going to sports medicine and feeding yourself, that's essentially a full-time job. Now, granted, this was a normal day on the national team. For the at the collegiate level, to be a student athlete, just take one or two of those, but we're still doing all the same amount of training. We're spending time in the boats, we're spending time in the weight room, we are running, we are doing stadiums, we are doing weight circuits, we're on the bikes. And all of this, so when we show up at the race course, we can put our whole energy into rowing incredibly powerfully and incredibly smooth for 6, 7, 8 minutes without our form or our endurance or grip strength starting to lag. I think it's really hard to describe the effort of a 2 kilometer rowing race for someone who hasn't been there. But imagine trying to run a mile as fast as you can uphill while holding your breath with a 40-pound pack on. Also do this while you're lunging. Also do this in perfect synchronicity with 7 other people. It is incredibly aerobically challenging. And I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of exercise physiologists use the rowing machine for their VO2 max testing, because it is such an efficient way to see how good of an athlete are you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you and I talked about this in one of our previous conversations, that the author of The Boys in the Boat, we both
Yeah.
agreed he wasn't an oars person. He wasn't an oarsman ever, but he really, for those that have tried it, that have done it, what you're talking about, that to the wall effort combined with the skill of trying to blend it with 7 other people, you can't take your eye off that part of it. He really
Yeah.
described it perfectly, and
He-
what it felt like when the boat was just singing, when the boat was, everything was in sync.
Mhm.
It's mystical. It's a magical
Mhm.
experience.
It really is. It is incredible. For people who have never been rowing before, I describe it as if you're tubing or you're water skiing, where initially you're in it and you're kind of just dragging it along the water, and then all of a sudden you kind of rise out and you're kind of coasting along the top. Now that can happen in the rowing boat too, but it takes an incredible amount of skill and timing and concerted effort to get all of your energies and your impulses and your timing perfect so that boat just kind of rises and floats. And in that moment, it's incredibly quiet and smooth and it's exhilarating. You really do get this extra little endorphin rush when all of your powers combine into something that is better. I still remember the first moment when I was in that Yale varsity boat for the first time, and we got that flow, we got that feeling, and I was like, oh, this is what makes this a winning boat. It's a mystical feeling. That's what I noticed by the end of my time training with Team USA. You could tell the athletes weren't necessarily the strongest on paper. I mean, they were very, very strong. These were the strongest athletes in the world. But what set them apart is they were able to get in a boat with anyone, and within 15 minutes, they could find that flow and they could get that swing. And it was a very unique skill set that is only developed from hours and hours and hours in a boat with other people. And it really is this incredible experience that I miss it. I miss feeling that power and that efficiency and that quiet as that boat just cuts through the water. So
Yeah, that's why when you read that by someone else, you
you get
you
the
realize
shivers.
he's got it. He's
He
totally
nailed it.
described something that's indescribable for someone that hasn't done it. And I'm glad we touched on that. So going back to the trajectory of your career, you win NC2As your junior year. and
Hmm.
then you win again your senior year. Who was
Twice.
your arch rival your junior year? What boat did you beat out for that first spot at the end at the line?
Yeah, so my junior year, so at the time, USC was the team to beat. This was, um, I was learning how to row and kind of being successful in women's rowing, really in this huge resurgence of NCAA women's sports, where any team that had a good and robust football team was seeing the impact and the effects of all this investment in women's sports due to Title IX. So we came into that junior season undefeated. USC on the west side was also coming in undefeated, and we came and it was just like this clash of the titans that ultimately we ended up winning.
Hmm.
um, in my senior year, we were pretty much returning the entire boat. We were feeling very, very confident. Um, but I think we kind of learned a little bit from our hubris where you could be the best crew at the boathouse, but if you have that little bit of inattention or that little bit of technical loss, we were beatable. And so we had been beaten by Brown coming into our senior year, and that definitely put a big stick on our shoulder. So we came into senior year ready to fight hard. And that race was incredibly close. It was down to the wire, last minute, came, by a millisecond even. And for those of you who haven't been to a rowing race, it's kind of an optical illusion because you have these big long boats that are racing in lanes, but it's really hard to see because of the angles and the geometry of how the race course works. It's really hard to see who is winning unless you have a video camera that's right parallel with the teams as they go along. So this was a situation where everyone on the shore couldn't tell who had won until they had video confirmation. So it was one of those. I'm
Wow.
really really proud of that victory just because it was so close. One of my best friends on the national team, she was from Stanford and she was in the boat that we passed at that last second. And she's still very good naturedly, but still gives me a little bit of grief about that race.
Yeah. I mean, again, not everybody's an athlete. Not everybody has done crew, even if you've done other sports. But a 2,000-meter race, a mile and a quarter, it 6 minutes usually at least. You broke 6 minutes, but for the most part, you're north of 6 minutes, and you come in second by a boat seat, by a couple tenths of a second over that long of a course. What? How can two boats be that close? And
Oh, yeah,
so
and that's kind of also the nature of rowing and how it works. It takes so much energy to intentionally change the momentum of a boat. All those rowers have to work in unison to make that power shift at the same time. And that's why that coxswain, that little person in the front of the boat who steers, that's why he or she is so important because she's the one who executes that change in momentum. So a lot of times in order to when you're racing that hard, it's really really hard to step it up another gear just because it takes so much time and energy to build up that build that boat to up to a different speed. And so that's why I'm particularly proud of races where I came from behind to win. Granted, that being said, I used to joke that with Team USA, the reason we trained so hard is not just so that we could win, but we could win by as much as possible to make it as a little easier.
that's funny. Yeah. Yeah, it's really fun to win by a boat seat, by a hair, but it's also fun for different reasons to win by a full boat, 2, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, which you did. So you had a great end to your Yale career, and then which of you and your teammates went on to the national boat? You went on. Who
Yeah,
else?
so I was the only senior in my year, so I went on to the national team. But then 2 years later, I was joined by several other of my teammates. So Taylor Ritzel was just like me, was not a rower in high school. She was a swimmer. She joined me 2 years later on the national team. And then one of our other pair partners, she was an Australian rower, and she raced for Team Australia at the Olympics as
Huh.
well. So we really had a really like top tier crew while we were at Yale, and a lot of us, it wasn't just about these 2 or 3 or 4 years. Many of us had some post college aspirations of to row at a higher level. That's one of the things I do. I mean, I miss so many things about Team USA, but one of the things I do miss a lot is walking onto into a racing venue or showing up at the race course and feeling like you were the team to beat. We were the big dogs on campus. The U.S. Because of Title IX, because of this incredible pipeline from the NCAA to national team, U.S. women's rowing was really in the middle of this huge surge of success. This is the women's eight, I think, was undefeated for, I think, almost 10 years in the early 2000s to the 2016. And I was right in the middle of that successful period. And so like I said before, it wasn't a matter of if we would win, it was how much we would win by, or, we knew that if we showed up and we executed our race plan, there was no country in the world that could come close, though Canada did try a few times. And it's funny, I think about this now. I'm like, this shows all of the hubris and confidence of a 24 and 25-year-old woman, someone who has never been tested, someone who has never experienced adversity. But it is a very addictive feeling to know that the gold medal was yours to lose. Like if you did your work, you would walk away successful. And that's a really fun place to train and compete in. So there's a lot
Yeah,
of things I miss about Team USA, but that's a good one.
nothing to apologize for by being on top and wanting to stay there, and being willing to do what it took to maintain that. And so you did transition to the national team, and ultimately Taylor came along with you, and she was also a rowing pair with you in the two-person rowing. So you've got a great friendship with her, obviously, as well as some of your other boatmates. I mean, there's nothing like rowing together and going to class for 2, 3, 4 years with the same people. You get pretty close.
It is hard
for the rest of your life.
Yeah, it is hard to put to words the strength and the depth of the friendships I made while rowing, just at college or on the national team. It's something about the shared suffering and the shared triumphs and all the time spent together. And, we are together, not just physically in the boat, but emotionally as we deal with all the things that are challenging for student athletes and for elite athletes. So the friends I made while rowing are still to this day some of my best and closest friends. They've seen me at my best. They've seen me at my worst. They saw me when I was covered in sweat and I had bloody blisters and I was just exhausted, but they also saw me and cheered for me when I was, on the national team and being successful. And so, yeah, the friends you make in an environment like that are some of the closest. I'm so thankful for the relationships that I made while rowing.
And so with that, on to the national boat and those, teammates that you trained with, you ultimately would choose to train with at the Olympic Training Center. We've talked a little bit, you talked about the routine, how many hours a day you were training multiple times. And I want to really briefly ask you about what you were eating, nutrition. And then I want to transition into your bump in the road, the Olympic year and your car accident, and talk about that in your own words, sort of what that was like. But talk a little bit about nutrition, because when you're working out 3 times a day, you kind of want to eat anything in sight, but you couldn't do that.
Anything and everything. I tell the story a lot of some of my teammates. They were on the men's team. And this particular athlete, he was tall, he was strong, but he needed to put on weight. He was only 200 pounds. And this male rower thought, if I could put on some muscle mass, I'd be much more competitive. But he really struggled with it. So he worked with a nutritionist and he was just tracking his intake just to see what changes he could make to gain muscle mass. And my teammate, just in order to maintain weight, in order to not lose weight, he was eating 8,000 calories a day. And I miss those days when I could eat. I was just always refueling just to maintain weight.
Yeah.
So I joke that at the time I was on a 3-hour diet where every 3 hours I was eating another meal. So I'd have our breakfast before practice, our breakfast in between morning practices, our first lunch, our second lunch, our first dinner, and our second dinner, and then a bedtime snack if I needed it. Just because when you're putting in that much work, it takes energy. I'm learning so much more now in my profession. I'm now a physical therapist working with athletes. And I do know now that so much of tissue recovery and tissue resiliency happens from the nutrition level. But back in the day, I was just a 24-year-old. So I was just making what I could in a crock pot with cheap proteins, eating as much, eggs and yogurt and cereal as I could. It was really great when we went to the Olympic Training Center in Chula Vista down in San Diego, because that training center came with this incredible dining hall where for us it was this incredible bounty where they had an omelet station and the salad bar and a grill, and it was just so nice to not have to also cook our own food in
Yeah,
addition to eating it.
a lot of food, and someone else was making it for you, and what a gift. Your plate was full with training, and
Yeah.
so you talked about the regimen, and we've talked a little
Mhm.
bit about diet, and let's just move to those rough couple of months.
Yeah.
Tell everybody what happened. What was the accident?
Yeah.
What was the nature of what happened, and
Mhm.
what happened to your body? How did you
Yeah.
sustain
So
injuries?
I feel like, in hindsight, this is a story we have heard before in any sports movie. This is that slow motion scene where everything changes. But yeah, in spring of 2012, at the time, I was well positioned to have a spot in that Olympic boat. I was strong. I was healthy. I was coming off of my third world championship. And I really felt like this spot was mine to make. Um, but we were down at the Olympic Training Center, and a teammate and I were on the way to the drugstore to pick up some supplements, to pick up some fish oil supplements or something. And on our way back, a lady ran a red light going 50 and T-boned our car. Now, all things considered, I'm incredibly lucky. I was able to walk out of the hospital. I had no major trauma, no major internal damage. It really, everything worked the way it should. The seatbelts worked, the airbags worked. We were in an SUV, thank goodness. But I ended up suffering a concussion and a pretty bad neck injury. Now, I was fortunate enough to have one of the best sports medicine providers in the country are at the Olympic Training Center. I had incredible care, but the timing was short. This is spring 2012. This is when Olympic selection is happening. So I did the best I could. I tried to get back to training as soon as I was able, and I was probably at 90%, which from the functional standpoint isn't bad, but 90% is not what it takes when you're trying to be best in the world. So as I was going through my Olympic selection, at the end of certain very vigorous race pieces, so at the end of a 2 kilometer race, my hands would start to go numb, and it was inconsistent. It didn't always happen, but it happened during the Olympic trials. So a team that we had never lost to was able to come from behind and pass us to take the win. And all the credit to this pair, like they earned their spot in the Olympic boat. They raced with courage, they raced with heart, and they did incredibly well at the Olympics. But in that moment, it's really hard when you realize this is the path you've been going on, and to realize that path has deviated. Um, it's still I to this day I still haven't taken fish oil supplements. I think they're cursed. But I think it was incredibly challenging for me, especially because in rowing, we say we succeed together, but we also fail together. So it wasn't just me who lost that race at Olympic trials, it's also my pair partner. And my pair partner is one of the best rowers in the country. She's one of the strongest rowers to ever come through the US program. We had been together, we had rowed together for years. She is one of the best teammates and best pair partners I could ever ask for. And in that moment, in that race, I let her down, and she also lost her spot in the Olympic boat. And it took me many
Mhm.
years to kind of deal with the shame, right? The whole point of rowing is to work together, and, you don't want to be the weak link. You want to be strong for your crew. But in this moment, I was not strong. Um, I was lucky enough, though. I think, the coach knew that just the timing was rough. If I had had another 6 months, who knows what recovery I could have had. But I was so fortunate enough. I was given the opportunity to go to London as the portside reserve for the 8 in the pair. So that means for those 10 women, if someone was injured or got sick or had an issue with eligibility, I would be there to be able to step in for that practice or for that race. So every day at the Olympics, I would suit up. I was rowing in the pair. I was doing all the training, and I was ready to go. There was a few days there, someone had a fever, so I'm like, oh, this is my shot, but she got healthy. Um, and yeah, it was incredibly bittersweet to stand on the sidelines and cheer for my team, for my boat, as they won a gold medal. I was so incredibly proud, but also it's hard to see, you're like, there's that woulda, coulda, shoulda. If I hadn't left in the, to the store that day, if I had been driving instead of being the passenger, if we'd been 5 seconds later, what could have happened? And who knows? But ultimately, the US, they had the healthiest 8 women were in the boat that day when they won the gold medal.
Yeah,
Um,
there's a
yeah.
lot of points there, that we could unpack. Your coach, how hard it is to be a coach, and he's got to
Oh,
make a decision how to set the boat, and you don't think that he likes you or believed in you before the accident. Of course he did,
yeah. It's
he or she, and how
yeah.
difficult to have to pick amongst
Well,
several qualified people that,
exactly. And I have to remind myself this where, the Team USA, the women were so strong. For every spot in that Olympic boat, there was probably 2 or 3 women at the training center who were world champions or world record holders or national champions. There's so many women who were able to be successful in those spots. And so for me, I realized it is not just me. I was given a fair shot, and I unfortunately in that moment could not succeed at the way I knew I was capable of. But I was so grateful for the opportunity to go to London and to be a part of that process. I remember before I went, I was just kind of sitting there and just dealing with everything that had happened over the last few months. And I told myself, listen, Jamie, I have the rest of my life to be frustrated or to be heartbroken or to be bitter about how the spring went, but I have the chance to go to the Olympics. And half of my teammates are on their couch at home watching the Olympics on TV, watching their dream happen without them. And so I was like, for their sake, for everyone who lost a seat race or who was selected out or who was injured in a way that was incredibly serious, like for their sake, I need to go to the Olympics as the reserve and be the best possible teammate I can be. Whatever I can do to get my athletes or my teammates to win and to be successful and to make their lives easier. And I was like, I'm going to go and I'm going to relish the Olympics as much as I can because this is a gift. So trying to reframe my Olympics experience not as a failure. I failed this, I lost a spot in the boat, and now I have to be the reserve. Instead as an opportunity where my coach still believes in me enough to fill in for any of these women if something happens. Um, and so, I still think about like, oh, my life would be a lot different if I had the bling, if I had that medal. But I'm still so incredibly like uplifted and thankful that I had the chance to be in the arena when it happened. And I'm so incredibly proud of my teammates. They were all of them, including the pair that beat us at trials. Like they had an incredible Olympic campaign and they absolutely deserved the chance to race for their country. And so, it's very easy for me now, 10 years after the fact, to look back on this with some introspection. And but at the time, it's really hard when you're a 26-year-old, 27-year-old, and you realize your life path, which you thought was straight and narrow, and all you have to do is just do the things and life will open up its opportunities for you. And you're like, well, there was a little bit of a bump in the road there.
it's why I think the Olympics are powerful. They're powerful
Mhm.
because there's good stories where everything does work out and you get the medal or whatever.
Yeah.
And then there's things like yourself, which I still think are really, really good. As you pointed out, you got to go. You
I
got
got to
to
go.
march in the parade for your country.
Mhm.
You got to wear your Olympic uniform
Yeah.
and be there in London. What an incredible venue. Um, was it what you had planned? It was not. And you and I talked about regret. I think
Hmm.
regret is a big thing where if you had said, I'm just going to go home, it's too hard, my chances are diminished, um, there would have been a real opportunity for regret later to say, I'll never know.
And
But
just, yeah. And
you left everything out there. You went for it and
yeah.
did the best you could.
And I think even because, I lost a race fair and square, but Olympic selection isn't always comes down to trials. Sometimes there's a process what we call selection, where it's a subjective process where the coach will look at all of these competitors and choose four or choose two. And so kind of watching the selection for the other boats and realizing that, the coaches use their best intuition and their best metrics, but still there are 8 women who deserve to be in the Olympic quad, and only 4 were chosen. And some of the 4 that weren't chosen were the best scullers in the country. And it was heartbreaking to watch that process. And I was like, you know what? I just to honor their loss and to like honored their experience. Like, I am not going to go to London and sulk, and I'm not going to go and be bitter. And in hindsight, I'm so glad I did, because the London Games it was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. Um, and it was something I still have dreams about, being able to be there and be one of the athletes and experience the hoopla and the festival and just the absolute just carnival that is the games. I'm so grateful for it.
Yeah, it's quite a spotlight, and you still were a part of that.
Yeah.
And so let's just transition here to kind of wrap up talking about life after the Olympics.
Yep.
And two, three things that we touched on that you would want to talk about for your life and maybe for others after the spotlight, after you hang up your oar or
Mhm.
whatever, your baseball mitt. Talk a little bit about that, what it's been like for these 13 years
Yeah.
post London.
So actually, in hindsight, my post-Olympic experience is actually one of the parts of my athletic journey that I'm the most proud of. A few years after my retirement from rowing, this was in 2015, I was selected or elected by my teammates to be the athlete representative for the U.S. Rowing Executive Board of Directors. Now, this is the kind of top committee for the governing body of our sport, which goes everything from professional and the Paralympic and Olympic development all the way down to the grassroots level. But with this position also came a spot on the USOPC's Athletes Council. Just like our Senate in DC, the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee has an Athletes Council that has 2 representatives, one male and one female, from every sport. And they come together to discuss and advise and advocate for athletes in all sorts of important issues. And for me, this experience was incredibly eye-opening about the nuance and complexity and the strategy of sports governance and sports performance. And so I served in this role with the Athletes Council from 2015 to 2020. And in this, there was all sorts of really important, really incredible issues that we were able to advocate for our athletes for. And so this was, for example, this was in the middle of when we discovered the extent of the Russian doping allegations at the previous Olympics. This was in the middle of when we were talking about athlete kind of behavior at the 2016 Olympic Games with some very highly publicized kind of behavioral issues, but also things like kneeling during the national anthem. This is when we did, this was during the formation of the Center for Safe Sport, which is a body designed to protect athletes from different types of sexual and physical abuse. One thing that I thought was incredibly important, 2020. So at the very beginning, we're starting to experience some small COVID closures, and we're worried about athlete qualification and racing. How is the athlete going to qualify for the upcoming games if their qualifying events in Asia have been canceled? Now, fast forward a month, we're talking about what are we going to do about the Tokyo 2020 games? How is qualification going to be different? Athletes who qualified in 2019, will they still have a spot in 2021? Um, Even things such as NCAA sport, all these changes with NIL and athlete branding and athlete rights, this has an impact on our Olympic team because the NCAA is one of the biggest developers and pipeline for US Olympic and Paralympic sport. And so if something happens to compromise, say, funding for track and field programs, what is the side effect 4 years, 8 years down the line for Team USA? So these are all things that I was in the room for with really powerful people trying to discuss how can we support our athletes now and how can you support our athletes a decade in the future. One project I'm actually especially proud of is with this role as athlete rep, I was able to actually go back to the games, not as an athlete, but as a staffer. I was the athlete service coordinator in the 2016 Rio Paralympics, the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Paralympics, and the 2021 Tokyo Olympics. And this was an athlete facing role designed for a recently retired athlete to help support athletes in the village as they are preparing to compete, recovering from competition, and then preparing to kind of go on and experience the games. And so when I was an athlete, I just assumed that things were set in place when we got there. I assumed my boat would be at the race course. I assumed the buses would be on time. I just assumed that my box lunch would be delicious and healthy and sufficient. I thought that my uniform would fit and my parents would have access to the hospitality house. These are all things I just thought magically happened for everyone. And it wasn't until working for the organizing committee for these games, I realized, no, these things were all the consequences of very intentional and foresightful planning from really experienced people behind the scenes. So I remember when I first arrived in Rio, within an hour, I am schlepping all these extra long beds up and down the stairwell so the volleyball athletes would have beds that were long enough. I got really, really good at repairing toilets in the Rio Village because there's no better way to pressure test a new apartment building than put in 500 athletes and just see what happens. A big part of my job is trying to, as athletes start to finish their competitions, the Olympic Games becomes more and more like a festival. Athletes, for the first time in 3.5 years, they can eat what they want, they can go where they want, they can hang out with who they want. And it really is like a college spring break, Super Bowl sort of atmosphere. And so how do I support these athletes and keep them occupied and distracted and safe? But how do I kind of separate them from the athletes who are still actively competing? And that is actually kind of a tough needle to thread, especially in Rio when there's so many things to do. In Tokyo, this was very easy because of the COVID precautions, the day after athletes were done competing, they were on a plane back home. And so instead of the Olympic Village getting more and more and more crazy, the Olympic Village got more and more and more quiet until
Yeah.
eventually the only athletes in the village were the team athletes who were involved in gold medal final in the final stages and the track athletes. So it was really incredible for me to just be able to support athletes in their moment, in like the moment of like all of their experience and all of their competition and it's culminating in this 2-week period. And what can I do in the village to make their experience just a little bit easier? And so it was really fun to kind of experience their successes, knowing that I might have had a very small part in it. So
I'm so glad we tacked this on to the other predictable stuff, the racing and all that stuff, especially with what, the way that your life unfolded. Not everybody, most Olympic athletes don't stay around in a support advisory, role. Maybe they're a coach, but not many people are involved like you working with the athletes in other capacities, including, lugging beds up the stairs. But I do think that's the reality of it from everybody that I've talked to. I interviewed divers last year that were in Paris in 24, and they were our first U.S. Medal for the U.S. team. They won a silver in pairs diving, and Cassidy Cook was just talking about our events were the very first day. So guess what? Guess who didn't march in the opening ceremony? Because you're walking for miles.
Yeah.
And we just couldn't afford those are hard decisions. If you make it all the way there and you're kind of assuming you're going to do it, and then you realize the logistics of it.
It's kind of understood now. So the opening ceremonies is a tricky beast. It is legitimately a 9-hour experience, especially when you think about the time it takes to get in line for the bus and ride the bus and assemble and walk. And so athletes were getting home at like midnight or 1 in the morning. So it's kind of understood that if you are a diver, a swimmer, a rower, if you're a team athlete that has a game the next day, you're probably going to be watching on TV. Now, in the Olympic Village, in the Paralympic Village, they still have a nice little, celebration for you because a lot of athletes are in this boat. But yeah, the goal is to get to bed early and show up ready to race. And your legs will be fried if you stood for that long at opening ceremonies. But it really is fun, especially not the case with Tokyo when athletes had to leave, but in other games where they were able to stay, just seeing how many athletes just embraced the whole community atmosphere of the
Yeah.
games. And so by the end, by closing ceremonies, the busiest I ever saw the Olympic dining hall was at 2 a.m. after the closing ceremonies at the McDonald's in the Olympic Village, where all these athletes were like, this is it, we've made it. And they all showed up for after closing ceremonies for their 2 a.m. Big Mac, or
Yeah,
multiple Big Macs, if you will.
that's a great story. That just unless you can comprehend life like that for months and years in this regimen, and you're finally done. You're done with your last Olympic
You're done.
event, and you're still there, and everyone else is there, and you bet it's like
Yeah, it's like
the
a rite of
handcuffs.
passage. Yeah, it
Yeah,
is. And it's so funny. The Everyone's Olympic journey is different, but the pre-Olympic year is really, really hard. It is physically challenging. It is financially challenging. It is emotionally challenging. Half of your best friends are going to have their heart broken. And so it is, many people show up just kind of with a little bit of existential burnout. But at the games, that 2 weeks, the 2.5 weeks when you're at the games, it is so exciting and so fulfilling that those 2 weeks is enough to make up for 3.5 years of frustration. And so many of my teammates, they show up and they're ready to retire, they're ready to get married, they're ready to go to grad school. And they went to London and they're like, you know what? I think I could do it another 4 years. I think I can go again,
wow.
because it is such a powerful experience, and I'm so grateful I was able to witness it at multiple levels, as an athlete, but later as a staffer, and even on the from the executive side in athlete governance and athlete advocacy, because it really is this unique event that there's not a lot of other things like it. So yeah, it's been a wild few years for sure.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your
Mhm.
perspectives, plural, as an athlete and then as an advisor, as involved in the governance, et cetera, being there behind the scenes, supporting other athletes for
Mhm.
not only for USA. I have a feeling you were a support for athletes from other countries as well. When you're in the village, you're all kind of in the same. You're in the same fishbowl,
Yep.
and everyone's just doing the best they can. So thank you, and thank you for promising that you would be willing to do this one more time here as we get closer to the Olympic year, LA 2028, which is
Yeah,
where
absolutely.
I'm broadcasting from. Um, we might have to revisit a lot of this stuff again. It's worth hearing a second time, and I'm hoping that we might have some company.
Oh, that'd
Um,
be great.
it'll be great. Right now, I'm just going to say, if it's just the two of us, or maybe there's, one more Olympic teammate from 2012. Either way, I'm really looking forward to it and staying in
Awesome.
touch with you. And
It's been so great to talk with you, Tim. And if you know anything about rowers, we love to talk about rowing. And there's so many incredible stories from my teammates on the 2012 crew, but also from those in 2016, 2020, 2024. You talk to any athlete about from any sport, and they will be able to talk at length about their history and their motivation and the kind of the ups and downs on the road that got them. And that's one thing that I think makes Olympic sports so cool. It doesn't matter what sport we're in, we all come with this shared experience where we love what we do and we want to be the best at what we do. And yeah, it's really an honor to be able to share my story with you. And I hope that I hope that someone listening to this will find something of value
it's
from
been
it.
terrific. I thought it would be good, Jamie. It's been better than I expected, and
Oh
I'm
yeah.
glad we get to do it at least one more time.
Awesome. Thank you. It's been wonderful, Tim.